Once your IT guy can pull it off.
Right. All right. So hello, I'm Cheryl Ziegler. I'm the director of the ULCC's Georgia and Layton Library. And on behalf of the ULCC Library Committee and Literary Subcommittee, I want to welcome you to our specialty book discussion, Graphic Novels 101, hosted by member Christian Berger. And this program will be followed by our graphic novel share-a-thon on October 26th at 6 o'clock, where we'll all come together again to talk about graphic novels we've read. Christian has graciously loaned several books from his own collection for checkout for members, and also available for checkout are many graphic novels from the ULCC library collection. I hope you'll come into the library to see the display and check out books from that display. We also have a great e-resource called Hoopla, which has hundreds of graphic novels. So I hope you'll check that out as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christian Berger, who has lived in the Chicago area for over 20 years, the last 12 in Old Town. He runs a management consulting firm from here and is an adjunct instructor at Northwestern's McCormick School of Engineering. He has 2 adult children, of which he is most proud. Christian is an avid cyclist, reader, and cook, as time permits. He is passionate about many things, graphic novels among them, and this you'll see firsthand. Christian has been a member of the Union League Club for 3 years. So thank you for being here, Christian.
Thank you, Cheryl, and I'm delighted to be here and to participate in this event. I think that like many things with the club, as they say, the more you put into it, the more you get back out. So this is my contribution to club life and club activity. And Cheryl, I think it's worth mentioning that you and I kind of concocted this idea during one of the subcommittee meetings. What could we do that was different and unique? And for me, the graphic novel is a very interesting phenomena. It's ragingly popular in a very narrow sense right now, almost a cult following, if you will. And I also happen to think that it's a bit misunderstood as an art form. A lot of readers tend to think of it, or maybe I should say a lot of adults tend to view it as comic books, or it is not serious, or it's too edgy and wouldn't be all that interesting and appealing. And certainly there is all of that in the realm of graphic novel, but there's also some very serious work being done with the art form and the genre. And so tonight, I hope in a fairly short span of time to share with you a little bit about graphic novels and what should be of interest, what could be of interest, what makes them compelling. Talk a little bit about different authors and artists, as well as maybe adaptations of graphic novel into film. We'll talk a little bit about, I'll share with you some of my favorites that you might want to explore on your own. We'll also talk about where to find good graphic novels here in the Chicago area. And as Cheryl said, I think October 26th, we're getting back together after everybody's had a chance to check out a book from the library or download one or possibly get one of your own from one of the bookstores to just get together and discuss what we saw and liked about graphic novels, maybe what we didn't like about graphic novels, and whether or not it's a worthwhile form. So that's our goal today. The other day when I gave this presentation, I mentioned the film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And that has absolutely zero to do with graphic novels. But for me, that film was a door opening to an entire category of music that I hadn't paid attention to before, the bluegrass music and folk music. And as those of you that have seen the film, you know that it's got plenty of both in the movie. And I became a real fan. And I was really surprised at how I'd gone so long in life without having an appreciation. But I think that's the way life is sometimes. You go through a door by chance and find a very interesting and different place than maybe you have in the past. So for me, this is my opportunity to maybe demystify graphic novels just a bit and share some good ideas, some favorites, and hopefully get a few more fans out there. I'm not going to read all of this. I just wanted you to know that in the realm of Wikipedia, there is a fairly good history of graphic novels. Their roots are certainly in the comic vein, way back in the 1800s. But the graphic novel term didn't really come into being until, as this says, 1964. And probably the most well-known instance, at least very popular, would have been Mao's in 1986. So that is how far back it goes. But the extent of the popularity has really been increasing, certainly with all the Marvel movies and such and adaptations, but within the last 20 years. So I also brought this up. I've been to France a few times, and one of the things that fascinates me is that they are they have a raging interest in the graphic novel over there. In France, it's called bande dessinée, which they actually shortened to BD, BD, which stands for graphic novel. And the art form is ragingly popular over there. So I think that other countries have really discovered the interest in graphic novels as well. Some of the authors and artists, some of these names you may be aware of or have heard of, and some perhaps should. But Joe Sacco, one of my favorites, is a graphic novelist, but more in the journalistic sense, and we'll talk about his work in a few minutes. Chris Ware is a very popular graphic novelist now, and he's actually from here in Chicago, but certainly has national awareness and position in the market. Harvey Crumb is a well-known and long-standing graphic artist who used to publish in Mad Magazine, for those of you that can remember that far back, and has more recent graphic novels as well. Alan Moore in the sci-fi realm. Neil Gaiman is very popular with a number of Sandman series and the American Gods series that have been adapted into a TV show. So he's quite the figure in the graphic novel realm. Guy Delisle, I'll talk a little bit about. Cheryl actually had one of his works in the library. I had one of his works in my collection, so they're both available. Emmanuel Guibert, we're going to talk a little bit more about him, a French graphic novelist, and his work. Sean Tan is very popular. So, and what you're going to find out is that you could find authors who are telling a story, and maybe you're only lukewarm on the actual artwork. On the other hand, sometimes you find a graphic novel that has tremendous and amazing artwork, and you're lukewarm on the story. Ideally, and most of my collection, I would say, is this way. I'm actually a fan of both, and we'll see some examples of that as we go along. Now, I know a lot of people don't spend time on who the publishers are of books and things, but the publishers are sometimes indicative, because they're the gatekeeper, and they won't publish material that they don't feel good about. Fantagraphics is a very big company. Drawn and Quarterly is perhaps the biggest of the publishers, and you will see their name on a number of different graphic novels. Vertigo. Then you've also got mainstream publishers, or let's just say slightly mainstream publishers like Verso, who do a lot of normal text-based work, but will put their imprint on graphic novels that fit within the genre. And we're going to talk about one of those in a few minutes. So a lot of companies backing the graphic novel community. I would say that it isn't fair to collect or identify graphic novel as just one type, because I feel like people might and think about, well, it's just a comic, or it's just sci-fi, or it's just gothic, and that's not the case at all. There's very serious journalism being done in the form of graphic novel. There's historical views, memoirs, dark noir stories that are more fiction. There's fantasy, sci-fi. Sometimes someone will try and use the graphic novel to explain very complex scenarios. I mean, there's a plethora of math-based graphic novels and philosophy-based graphic novels, with people trying to convey or help explain very difficult content in using graphic novel as a method. There's political and sometimes even just a simple retelling of a story in a graphic novel form. So not all of these will be your cup of tea, but some of them could be. And I think it's worth exploring and finding the ones that suit. One last explanation before we jump into some good examples. There is a section within most bookstores when you look at graphic novels. Right next to it is something called Manga, and that is the Japanese version of a graphic novel. And it's typically done in black and white, like you see in the panel on the right, and tends to have a lot of fantasy involved. And I also wanted to differentiate this from what's called anime. You may see that in, let's say you've got a Netflix account and sometimes anime pops up. These are typically cartoon or colored panes, like the one below from the movie Spirited Away. And I think that can be another interesting venue, or avenue, I should say, avenue around to explore if you like the form in general. Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle would probably be considered among the best examples of that particular form. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, and I'll move briskly through this section here, but we'll talk about some of the authors and works that I'm most impressed with in this collection. Safe Area Garazda is just one of Joe Sacco's probably, 6 or 8 different works. And what's interesting about Joe Sacco is that he puts himself in, he's in Garazda in this particular case, not during the war, but I think it's immediately after, or maybe it is a little bit during. And he is reporting on exactly what he's seeing, but he's doing it with the, artwork and the dialogue as best he can. And what you'll actually find out, you'll see down here, well, at the bottom, on the cover of Sarajevo, that's Joe Sacco right there. So you'll find him in the work itself. And one of the things that I think is so compelling about this is, and I made a note here on the slide, when you're reading through this graphic novel and you're seeing these people and places, I have to say, I feel it does a better job of inviting you in, and you feel like you're right there watching, listening, learning about everything that Joe Sacco is. So if you like that sort of journalistic narrative, I couldn't recommend someone more highly as a way to start. Now, I will also say this is not happy material. You don't leave cheery and laughing. It is a sobering look at that situation. Marjane Strapi is an Iranian author, and she writes this novel, Persepolis, and I think a subsequent one called Persepolis 2, is a narrative of her time in Iran during the Iranian Revolution, which we all know was a very, very radical time, and particularly for women. And this story was very, very popular, and among the more popular graphic novels out there. And particularly if you're interested in sort of a first-person narrative of that time. I mentioned Neil Gaiman in American Gods. Those of you that have seen the show might be compelled to go back and look at look at the graphic novels, on which it was based. Neil Gaiman fans are a unique breed. They are very passionate about his work and him as an author. And again, this is sometimes a little on the graphic side, if I may use that term. And but good story and very creative. That's one of the things I like about graphic novels, is I think it allows an artist to be more creative than they might be just using text. Alan Moore is a very famous graphic novelist, been around a long time. And one of his works that I particularly liked was The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It was a 2-volume production when I got to it, and it was kind of a Victorian fantasy tale of sort of some Victorian era morals, and also some mystery and intrigue built in, as you might be able to gather from these characters here. So good artwork, good story. I like Alan Moore. Now, this is a good example of someone explaining the complex using a graphic novel form. The book is Logic Comics, and the author is, and I'm not going to do the man's name justice, but Doxius, and he is a Greek without a doubt. And he got interested in some aspects of philosophy. And so he did this graphic novel explaining logic and sort of epistemology. And Bertrand Russell figures into the equation here. So he'll actually bring a real character from fiction, from a real character into the narrative to help explain things. So you'll have to determine yourself whether you like graphic novels for that purpose or not. But this to me was fascinating. But again, I'm interested in that topic. Here was Art Spiegelman's sort of masterpiece, Maus, and then later Maus 2, and it was about the rise of Nazi Germany, told through the story of family of mice. And I probably should know why he chose mice, but nonetheless, it is a very passionate and ultimately sad tale of a memoir. And I think that people that are interested or want to know about the form of graphic novel have to know about Maus, because this was one of the foundational works in the genre. This one was another favorite of mine by Jim Ottaviani. He wrote the Imitation Game. Now, some of you may know that there was already a really good biography out there by Andrew Hodges, on Alan Turing and the Turing machine. And I really highly recommend that biography, actually. But as a graphic novel, it distilled things down, it simplified things, but it still told some of the key parts of the story. And I thought this was a good novel. Now, I mentioned Guy Delisle, and he has several works out. He actually puts himself, much like Joe Sacco, into various difficult places and tries to do honest journalism. He was in North Korea, he was in Burma and Jerusalem. And the artwork is good, although nothing special. But he is reporting on what he's actually seeing, and he's trying to be as careful as he can be to report actual events. Jason Lutz came out with Berlin several years ago, and it was quite the success. It's a rather substantial work, probably, I'm going to guess, on the range of maybe 300 pages or so. For a graphic novel, that's quite a bit. And it's all taking place in Berlin at the probably just before the war. And tells a very brutally honest story of some people in that time and place. So I would recommend that if you've got an interest in the subject matter. As for artwork, I would say, again, not bad, but nothing special. Now, this work is by Etienne Davido, is called Les Ignorances, and it's the story of the graphic novelist Etienne Davido and a friend of his that he met who is a vintner at a wine vineyard. And the two of them become friends and share both history of wine and wine growing, as well as being an artist and a graphic novelist. And so the story moves back and forth between the two and how they travel around and see different things and explore French culture, which I'm a fan of. So it's both, it really operates on many levels. If you're interested in wine, if you're interested in graphic novels, if you like French culture, if you enjoy stories where two sort of adult men become friends over time, even though maybe they're not of the same exact political outlook all the time, it was fascinating in that way. I thoroughly enjoyed that work. Now, if you want your graphic novel a little more, let's say, dark and gory, Frank Miller will not disappoint. This graphic novel was made into a film that included Bruce Willis. What was interesting about Bruce Willis, by the way, did a good job in the movie, but what was interesting about this is he actually, the movie itself was filmed in a manner of comic pain. So you would see a scene set up, it would be in black and white, and then there might be a flash of color in the pain somewhere or in the scene somewhere. So the director, and I don't know who it was, but the director of the film actually made the film look a lot like the graphic novel, not necessarily following it page by page, but still had that look and feel. So that was pretty interesting. Now, this one's an interesting phenomena, and I will use that term because this woman, Emile Ferris, she's a Chicago native. It was a memoir about her growing up in Chicago, and for both probably graphically and the narrative, ragingly popular. So this one flew off the shelves, and she got a lot of pressure to produce a second work, and sadly, I would say that publishing date keeps slipping. So we're not sure when that's going to come out. But just as a reference point, I shared this one with my son, and he absolutely loved it. And he's 30 at the time. I think he was 30. So for those of you that might be eyeing graphic novels for your kids, this would not be a bad. Chris Ware, I mentioned, Chicago native, has a very interesting style and does some pretty interesting things with the form. He also actually, when publishing, will do things like have a bound box with some artwork around it, as well as having then 3 of the graphic novels inside. And they relate, but they stand alone at the same time. So I am I respect the work he does. I like it. It's not my favorite to read because I actually like the graphic novel personally more for the story, or as much for the story as the artwork. Now, here is one that I am very excited about, probably my most favorite work in the graphic novel genre, and that's hard to pick, by the way, but it's a work called The Photographer. And I think I'll have an actual cover of the book in a minute. The Photographer was a work that brought an actual photographer to be embedded with some doctors from Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders. They went, I think in roughly the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, into Afghanistan during the war, and they were trying to help people out. So the photographer was there and taking many, many pictures. The graphic novelist, Emmanuel Guibert, came along after and saw all the photographs and was like, wow, this is amazing, and wanted to tell the story. So this book actually has a combination of the photographer's pictures from Afghanistan, as well as a narrative along the way. And if I can find it, I'm going to play for you this is the book itself. And I'm going to play for you a very short video that was a discussion of the work with Guibert Lefebvre and NPR. So forgive the...
Hi, Clark Boyd here from PRI's The World. Now, I love comics. I always have. So it was great to get to do a radio report on this book, The Photographer, and to have a chance to give you some insight into its unique look, a mix of stark black and white photographs and inked drawings. Now, The Photographer tells the tale of this man, Didier Lefebvre. In 1986, Lefebvre accompanied a Doctors Without Borders medical team into war-torn Afghanistan. 13 years later, Lefebvre worked on the book with his friend Emmanuel Guibert. Now, Guibert is a well-known French graphic novelist and comics artist. And one day he asked his friend to tell him about a trip he'd taken. Well, Lefebvre dragged out a box of some 4,000 photos on the original contact sheets from that trip to Afghanistan. I'll let Emmanuel Guibert take it from there.
The job of the photographer is as well as to shoot, as to choose afterwards what he has shot. That's why these contact sheets exist. That's on the contact sheets that he chooses the photographs that are going to be printed afterwards. The red crayon features, you see lines, you see are what Didier has put on them to indicate that this photograph had to be printed. When I saw this for the first time, I was struck by the beauty of these contact sheets and this red feature. Of when he showed them to me, I said, this is a beautiful object. This is what I want to show in the book. The presence of the photographs on the pages spared me from being too precise in my own drawings, because the reality is in the photographs. He said to me, while I was taking these pictures, I was like fishing. I felt there was something interesting going on, and I could smell the good picture coming. And in fact, among all of these pictures, he reached the perfection. There's a picture which is eternal. It's a picture about all the travelers since the dawn of humanity. There's the donkey, the two persons. There's this eternally flowing river around them, the mountains in the horizon, and the light is absolutely magnificent. It's a miracle, and it's a miracle that he has searched and that he has reached. And I have this photograph in my apartment, and I will live forever with it.
To hear more about Didier Lefebvre's amazing story, visit theworld.org and listen to my radio piece.
I thought that was a nice, short little video of history about the work. And I can't help but feel that this is an example of the height that graphic novels reach. And it's so much more than a comic or a child's genre. So let me just go back, because I think I skipped over a couple. Grass Kings is Matt Kent and Tyler Jenkins, again, very popular. Love the artwork, and the story is very compelling. This cover is volume 3. There's a couple of other volumes before it, and really like that quite a bit. The hunting accident was an interesting one as well. This is an actual true story. The blind gentleman who you see in the paint is, he was a prisoner, and he was in prison for a crime, and he is telling a story to, I believe it's his nephew, many years on, and it turns out that the prison that this blind man was in with was actually, I don't know if he shared a cell, but a cell block with Leopold and Loeb. So he got a lot of backstory and history of that event and those individuals. And that's told through this story called The Hunting Accident. I mentioned Lefebvre. Kate Evans has done a couple of really nice works, one called Red Rosa, one called Threads. Red Rosa is on the Rosa Luxemburg, and a socialist leading woman out of Germany, I believe, and who was ultimately killed. And then Threads is about sort of life in refugee camps, much more contemporary, and good art and good narrative as well. But I would also say these are not sort of super uplifting stories. So that was just a quick walk through some of my collection and the ones that I felt like really are good examples of the form and how diverse it can actually be. Now, for some of you, you might want to think about the ease with which a graphic novel could be turned into a film. And a number of directors have done that. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was turned into a film with Sean Connery. American Gods was turned into a TV series. Watchmen and 300, I think we've seen. Sin City, I mentioned, and how that was turned into a film that looked like comic pain, and V for Vendetta as well. So it is a form that lends itself to turning it into film. Now, if you are so compelled by this and you think, well, I'd like to explore more, there's a store here in Chicago. They're a chain. They probably have about 5 or 6 stores in the entire area. One of those is on Madison, just off of Michigan, like a block off of Michigan. So very easy to get to for those of you downtown. For those of you on the north side, the store on Broadway is actually pretty close. And in the basement of Broadway store is a very large selection of graphic novels that some of them have been marked down. Unabridged on Broadway as well, further up, carries a good selection, well cultivated, though not large. And Seminary Co-op also has a good selection, though not large. Believe it or not, Barnes & Noble on State Street, I'm not sure what their opening is now, but they actually have a decent collection as well, just to the left of the information desk there. When you see the word comics in a store like Graham's, don't think that the only thing they carry is comic books. They certainly do, and they have game cards and other sort of material like that. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to find a good graphic novel section as well. When you evaluate or when you think about graphic novels, we're going to be very interested to have a discussion in a few weeks and see what people thought. I'm always fascinated by the artwork, and I like to see how people do things. I like the plot and the pacing, and I'm also kind of fascinated by the dialogue that's usually accompanying the work. I would say you wouldn't be worse off if you actually skimmed a few volumes and found ones that looked of interest to you, either based upon the story, based upon the character, or based upon the artwork, and then give it a try. During the meeting that we have next on the 26th, I would say it's as much about your reaction to the form as it is to the story itself. And so with that, Cheryl, I think I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks. That was great. I'm really looking forward to the 26th. I hope you all will join us. Like I said before, we have several books in the library here at the club, and there are lots of different resources that Christian told us about. One other thing I wanted, just kind of throw out there, Christian, could you speak a little bit to why the graphic novel form has been considered relatively fringe?
Well, I would say that it probably started that way. I mean, when you look at some of the early work, and perhaps I think it was also people's association. When you open up a graphic novel right away, you see pictures and it looks like comic panes. And so people just instantly think, oh, it's a comic book, and sort of dismiss it, unless you're looking for a comic book. And I would also say that it was probably a genre that was associated with younger people. There was some dark material in there and some fantasy sci-fi material in the graphic novel, and stuff that would appeal to a teenager or maybe someone in their 20s. And so for those reasons, I think the adult reading community probably just put it in that category and never really opened the door. And I honestly wish I could remember which graphic novel opened the door for me. One of them did, and it wasn't too long until I had a decent collection of my own. And now I actively seek it out wherever I go. I just think it's one of those things that it got misunderstood early on, but now it's moving back, and I just wanted people to give it. Look, you give it a chance, and you try one or two works, and if it doesn't appeal to you, no one's the worse for wear. But I think for some of you, like myself, you'll find a fascinating world in there. Oh, Cheryl, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you so much. And I hope we'll see you all on the 26th. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks, Cheryl.